Cataract can be defined as the opacification of the lens that is caused by multiple reasons. That can be basically of the traumatic origin on one hand. It can be a congenital cataract that is basically relating towards the maternal infections, or if the mother has been taking some long-term drugs on regular basis, the patient or the infant can suffer from some sort of congenital cataracts as well. The other miscellaneous causes for the formation of the cataract can be the infectious causes, it can be the inflammatory causes. Then we have the long-term systemic diseases that can also present as the cataract formation, usually bilaterally. The systemic diseases usually manifest as bilateral cataract formation. That is basically the cataract formation in both of the eyes, or involvement of both of the eyes is seen in such cases. Now, what are these particular diseases? It can be some sort of syndromes, for example, Down syndrome, Loyal syndrome. Then we have the diabetes mellitus, hypercholesterolemia, hypertension. All of these are basically some of the associations or some of the diseases that can be associated with the cataract formation, either bilateral or either unilateral in these particular cases. So whatever the cause may be, whatever the case may be, we have to know the underlying metabolic pathways that are basically relating towards the formation of this opacification of the lens that is basically causing the blurring of the vision. And if left untreated, it can even result in the complete blindness or the complete loss of vision in that particular eye, or if it is the bilateral involvement, it can be the complete loss of vision in that particular patient. So it's quite a serious problem, and one should know the significance towards it. It's again quite a prevalent disease. According to a research in the United States of America, in the 8th decade of life, most of the people, almost 80% of the people, have undergone cataract surgeries by then. So it's quite a prevalent disease. Its incidence has been increasing in the last 2 decades, and it's again very important to study this disease. What are the underlying metabolic pathways which we can basically hinder, and that is basically going to slow down the process of the cataract formation in these particular patients. So knowing these metabolic pathways is again very important, and again the mainstay over here. The pathophysiology of the cataract, as I was already focusing on, that it's basically the 3 metabolic pathways that come into play or that come into action, and that is basically going to relate towards that opacification in the lens. Now again, if we look at the structure of the lens, or if we just recall the anatomy that we've already undergone, the anatomy of that particular lens, there were these equatorial regions, then we studied the nuclear or the central part. Then we have the cortical part as well. The nuclear or the central part contains the most aged fibers, and that are basically more prone to the development of the opacification as well. So the nuclear cataract is one of the major varieties that we usually see when we carry out an outpatient department that is regarding these cataracts or just the eye examinations. So this senile kind of a disease, which can be called even as a senile cataract because it is most common in the old age group. So what are the underlying metabolic pathways that are relating to it? It is one of the major pathways is the glycolysis, which basically involves the Krebs cycle as well. And then we have the HMP pathways, we have the pylol pathways on the other hand. So these are basically the 3 metabolic underlying processes that are basically laying the foundation towards the development of this opacification in the lens. So we're going to study them one by one over here. If we look at it over here, it's basically the lens with cataract, a normal eye, which is a healthy lens is over here. which is basically refracting these light rays, and it is forming a complete or a distinct image on the retina. And over here, when we see the lens with a cataract, what is happening over here, that is due to the opacification, the light rays are scattered and they're not focused on this particular point on the retina. And that is the basic pathophysiology over here, that these rays are not being focused on the retina and they're not forming that distinct image over here. So this is what is basically causing the blurring of the vision in patients with cataract. Lens is made mostly of water and protein fibers, and the opacity occurs when the lens proteins, crystallines, they clump together. So this is the basic pathophysiology, that it is basically the clumping of the proteins that is causing the opacification inside the lens. When we look at it over here, it's again, the diagram is again showing or focusing on the scattering of the light and a blurred image. And over here, no scattering in the healthy lens and a focused or a more distinct image on the retina is seen over here. The ability for the lens to refract light reduces, which causes the reduced visual acuity in people who are suffering from the cataract formation. The chemical modification of the lens causes it to be thickened and harden. So again, it's just not the opacification, it is also causing the lens to harden as well and to thicken as well. So the pathophysiology, obviously, it's not fully understood, but the three major metabolic pathways which can correlate to the formation of this opacification, which convert glucose in energy, are glycolysis on one hand. We have the pentose phosphate shunt system, which is also known as the HMP pathways. And then we have the pylol routes. So these are the three major pathways that we're going to discuss one by one. First of all, the glycolysis. So obviously, when the lens is going to undergo the aging process, it is going to decrease in the hexokinase concentration. So the drop in the ATP levels is also noticed over here, and the poor control of the electrolyte balance is also noticed during this glycolysis. The massive influx of water into the lens is allowed, and which is going to result into the disorganization of the structured proteins in the lens. The aggregation and the precipitation of the proteins is also after this disorganization of the structured proteins in the lens, and that disaggregation or that precipitation of the proteins, which was also called in the layman terminology, that basically there is clumping of the proteins noticed inside the lens, that is going to basically give way towards the cataract formation. So this was the whole pathological basis behind this glycolysis or behind this cataract formation over here. Then we want to see the HMP pathway, or the HMP pathway that is going to lead towards the opacification of the lens in the patients. We have the G6 phosphate over here, that is basically the glucose 6 phosphate over here, which is converted into 6-phosphogluconolactone. In the presence of, obviously, the NADP is converted into this, oxidization is basically done in the presence of the magnesium crystals. And glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase is the enzyme that is involved at the biochemical level when we're talking about it. Now, this 6-phosphoglucanolactone is then converted into the in the presence of the glucanolactone hydrolase, it is converted into 6-phosphoglucanolate. And then it is converted into the ribulose 5-phosphate in the presence of phosphogluconate dehydrogenase. So these are the enzymes that are involved over here. And this is basically known as the HMP pathway, or the hexose monophosphate shunt that we were talking about. The metabolization of 14% of glucose, it takes place through this pathway or this shunting mechanism that is usually present. The NADPH plus H positive synthesis, that is H positive is basically the radical ion that is formed over here. It is synthesis by the glucose 6-phosphate. Then we have the pylol pathway. So again, the pylol pathway is again going to result in the cataract formation. And how is it going to do it? Over here, we can just have a look that the high glucose levels in the blood is going to start off the pylol pathway. When is this condition mostly seen that we have this high glucose levels in the blood? Obviously, it's the excess glucose is present in the blood in the diabetic patients. So diabetes mellitus basically results in the formation of the cataract in a patient through this pathway. The pyrrole pathway is activated right here, and then we have the glucose. The glucose is converted into sorbitol in the presence of aldose reductase, and then this sorbitol is accumulated in the lens. So this glucose, which is converted in the form of sorbitol, and this sorbitol is then accumulated in the lens, and that is basically going to convert the hyperosmotic effect, that is the influx of the excess water through the aquaporin channels, and this excess water is again, the influx of the excess water is again going to result in the cataract formation over here. So the pyrrole dehydrogenase has low kinetic molecular energy for sorbitol. So this is again one of the mainstay over here, that the sorbitol is why sorbitol accumulated inside the lens. This is one of the reasons that we can see over here. Then associating diabetes with cataract. We've already studied this pyrrole pathway and how this glucose is converted into sorbitol, and how the sorbitol is then accumulated inside the lens, and after it is accumulated inside the lens, it's again going to cause that influx of water due to the osmotic pathways or due to the osmotic channels. The increased concentration of glucose required to activate the aldose reductase, and the aldose reductase has a high kinetic molecular energy and low affinity for glucose as well. The importance in the fructose production for spermatocytes is again very important over here. The sorbitol has significant osmotic effects, and due to these osmotic effects, it is causing the influx of the water inside the lens, and finally the cataract formation is resulting through this pathway. Cells use glucose for energy. This is one of the factors that we have to keep in our mind over here. And the phosphorylation via the enzyme hexokinase is again very important over here. The large amounts of glucose are then basically produced inside the body, and due to this large amounts or due to this excess glucose that is present inside the body, the pyrrole pathways, they are activated. The hexokinase becomes saturated as well, and the excess glucose enters the pyrrole pathways, as we were already focusing on this fact. And when aldose reductase reduces it to sorbitol, we know that the sorbitol is accumulated inside the lens, and once the sorbitol is accumulated inside the lens, it is going to cause the influx of the water as well due to the osmotic pressures, and it's going to relate towards the cataract formation. The hexokinase can return the molecules to the glycolysis pathway as well over here by phosphorylating the fructose to form the fructose 6-phosphate at this level as well. The high blood glucose more than glycolysis pathway can handle this situation. Talking about the pathophysiology over here, the sorbitol, it collects in the lens, it affects the cells, and naturally occurring proteins as well are also affected over here, and it is basically causing the lens to become less clear and more opaque. Again, it is the same pathophysiology. The opacity of the lens is causing all of the problems, the blurring of the vision, the scattering of the light rays, and not the formation of a distinct image on the retina. So this is the whole pathological cycle. It is the vicious cycle that starts off, that can start off with any conditions that can basically kick off, or that can basically activate these underlying metabolic pathways, ranging from the glycolysis. It can be the pyrrole pathways, or it can be the HMP shunts as well at this level. So over here in this section, we particularly focused on this fact that these particular clinical picture that is seen in the patients of cataract, when they're basically complaining of this particular picture, that they have this blurred vision. What is the causative factors? We've already came to a conclusion that the opacity of the lens is the basic cause or the basic reason behind it. But when we look at the different metabolic pathways that are basically causing or ending up in the opacification of the lens, we should know the three major pathways, that is basically glycolysis. On one hand, we have the HMP, shunt systems, and then we have the pylol pathways that can be activated and result in the cataract formation in the patients. So that is the end of this section. Thank you for watching sqadia.com.